Republican Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota, and as I said, also a member of the Senate Banking Committee. Senator Cramer, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
And as I said to Senator Menendez, we booked you before this banking this collapse, but with our good fortune that you're on the Banking Committee. So let me ask you this. What have you learned over the last 48 hours? What do you expect to happen tomorrow morning?
Yeah, well, first of all, when you hear from Steve Leisman, you almost don't need to ask anybody else because he really is the guy that in the know and a smart thinker and all of these things. So I'd probably call him for advice. I actually think he covered it very well. My sense of it, Chuck, is it is a fairly localized issue. The problem is that we live in a very emotional time where markets are emotional. The reference to social media as being an accelerator, if you will, of some of that emotion. I think can be problematic. But I hope that with the weekend came some calm and certainly some strategy as well. But there are so many unique things about Silicon Valley that aren't necessarily applicable systemically. So my hope is it's very localized and we can address it in that way.
Do you at all, in 2018, you remember the House, you were a co-sponsor of a repeal of part of Dodd-Frank. That loosened some regulations on smaller banks. There are some that are pointing to that loosening, saying maybe that would have that was something that perhaps would have prevented Silicon Valley Bank from putting themselves in this position. Do you think these smaller banks need more regulation or less?
Yeah, they certainly don't need any more regulation. That doesn't mean that you can be mismanaged. Now, we have to throw in the obvious, and I think you talked about it in the first segment, and that is the fact that we have seen a rather sharp increase in interest rates, which have put some smaller banks, at odds with their own balance sheet. Now, of course, we have a Federal Reserve trying to change its balance sheet at the same time, and perhaps we need to do a little more review of all of that. But I don't think smaller banks need more oversight or more regulation. Maybe better oversight, but certainly not more regulation.
With all this volatility right now, is this the time to have a debt ceiling fight?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. We are living in pretty much a debt crisis right now, and it's not just about the government's debt ceiling, but many individuals have hit their own debt ceiling, and their savings accounts are being drained, and so we have kind of a crisis, if you will, on our hands that requires lots of things. We don't need to have a fight on debt ceiling, but this is why I think it's foolish for the president to simply say, "I'm not going to negotiate on the debt ceiling." This is the time to have a negotiation.
Is it though?
And do something in a
isn't it better to just have a debate about the debt ceiling? Don't mess with the economy right now, and then you actually have a budget debate. Put out a budget and have two budgets and actually do it the old-fashioned way, not use the debt ceiling.
Well, the problem with the old-fashioned way is that it has eluded us now for a decade. I've been in Congress over a decade, and I've never seen the old-fashioned way. We've never had a regular order, as they call it. So I agree with you. We need to get back to that. But I think the debt ceiling situation is one of the opportunities to demand that. And maybe all get together and work with one another.
Let me turn to a couple of political issues. Do you think the former president, you were an early supporter of the former president, you haven't endorsed him yet for 2024. You've said you'd like to see somebody like him, and you haven't ruled out endorsing him. But if he is indicted, regardless of whether it's Manhattan or Atlanta or in Washington, do you think it's healthy for the party if he keeps running, or do you think he should step aside?
Sure. Well, first of all, Donald Trump's not going to take advice from the party or from me, but I think what will happen is if he's indicted, that becomes one of the factors in whether he wins primaries or not. The other factor is who else is in the race and who can make the best case. Obviously, you've highlighted Governor DeSantis, who has certainly earned the right to be at the head of the class through not just through his political rhetoric, but through his successful governing of a very large state. And I think, seeing him out on the stump a little more now, doing the things that potential presidential candidates do, I think will help that debate along. The challenge becomes if there are too many people in the race. And there are other good ones, Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, certainly, my friend Tim Scott, would all be good candidates who understand the Trump doctrine, but have a demeanor that's probably more suitable to the swing voter. And at the end of the day, what's most important for primary voters to think about is not just who they love the most, but who can win for the country and who can win for the party, because we're in desperate need of some new leadership.
So you think electability should matter a little bit more than it usually does?
Well, I think it should always matter for primary voters. Certainly, there's no glory in losing spectacularly compared to winning humbly. So I'd rather see a humble victory.
All right, I got to ask you about January 6th because there were just two different reactions to what we saw this week. Tucker Carlson said on his air about January 6th that a small percentage of them were hooligans, they committed vandalism, but the overwhelming majority weren't. They were peaceful, they were orderly and meek. These were not insurrectionists, they were sightseers. And then Vice President Mike Pence last night to the Gridiron Dinner said this: make no mistake about it, what happened that day was a disgrace, and it mocks decency to portray it any other way. Where do you come down, on Tucker Carlson's side or on Mike Pence's side?
Well, first of all, both sides can be right rhetorically, but the problem is you know, a 4-hour stroll through the Capitol that's marred by a half hour of rioting doesn't make it a peaceful protest. And nobody was supposed to be in the Capitol, so there's not a single person who's completely innocent of wrongdoing. But not everybody that day is at the same level of crime. 518, by the way, have confessed to committing crimes that day. 420 have been prosecuted and sentenced. So clearly it wasn't a peaceful protest. That's not to say that the vast majority of them don't have regret or they didn't understand the severity of what they were doing or the severity of what some other people are doing. I do think it's unfair to put them all in the same bucket. I've never felt like a democracy is actually in trouble. We survived a civil war. We're going to survive this as well. What frustrates me as much as anything, Chuck, is that we're talking about it again. Here we had the January 6th Commission wrap up its work, mostly people not caring or paying any attention. It was very partisan, to say the least. And here we were moving forward. We should be talking about the southern border, as you were discussing earlier. We should be talking about China and the challenge it possesses, and talking about inflation and a budget that drives up deficits forever. And those are winning arguments for Republicans, not relitigating January 6, 2020 or 2021.
You're a regular guest on Fox News. You've seen all this internal communications. Has it given you pause about how they conduct themselves with you?
Well, first of all, I don't confuse my job with anybody at Fox News, at least of all the entertainers in prime time. That's not to say they don't add some value. I don't confuse Tucker Carlson with Bret Baier or Dana Perino or Bill Hemmer any more than I confuse some of the MSNBC personalities with what you do on Sunday mornings. I just think that there's just way too much entertainment out there. What I do regret, probably as much as anything, about the release of the 41,000 hours is that it was released to one person in prime time who is, rather sensational in his approach, and rather than just releasing it to everybody. I think transparency absolutely is the best way to go. I think Kevin McCarthy's right to do it. I just wish he would have released it to everybody at the same time. Yeah, neutral transparency. If you really wanted it, that's how you would have done it. Senator Cramer, Republican from North Dakota, really appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective with us. It's always good. Always my pleasure. Thank you, sir. Thank you.